yeah, we've already hit record. So I guess the conceit here is we're also trying a new experimenting.
Yes. With recording ourselves in 3D or spatial video.
Spatial video. So
for the 10 people in the world that use the Apple Vision Pro.
But you know what? We will literally come alive in their viewers.
Yes.
So I think, at least for a little bit, we're going to experiment with this for a bit.
Yep.
And see how that goes. But then, so one of the things that's fun for me about that is it does kind of go back to like, no more, I'm not being threatened to live cast this stuff or live stream this time, but also it brings back so much fun of doing things a little bit the old school way.
Oh, like with a clapper
With
board.
a clapper. Yeah. And it's, it's relatively up to date. It doesn't really have any dates on there. So for sound synchronization, this is a lot of fun. All right.
mean we're live now.
We're in it. Yes. Also, I love today that so for people who will watch the YouTube videos, yes, I'll be wearing the same shirt twice because we're double stacking today, which is going to be fun.
Yes.
And one of the things I absolutely love is we hadn't decided we were going to do this until like half an hour ago.
Right.
But that's one of the things that I think is so much fun is on the drive-in. I was like, I wonder if we can talk about this today before we talk, because I won't ruin it right now, but we have a guest coming. But yeah, so it was fun. It was like circle the wagons, whatever other metaphors is like, fire the alarm. And it was like, we'll be back at 30 for podcasting. Let's go.
Right. And we're on. Plus the fact we should explain talking about the 3D stuff. So,
yes.
So
let's do that.
We've discovered it is really fun if we use our iPhones to record this video, in 3 dimensions. This is Apple Spatial Video.
Yep.
And then we can put it up on the web. And if you've got the Apple Vision Pro, which I know not many people have, but
some
if you
people
have,
do.
It actually feels like you're in the room with us.
Yeah, you're like you'll be sitting
you'll
right
be
here,
sitting
Hi.
at the table. right. So we're experimenting with this as a new format for podcasting.
Well, and I think we'll do at some point. I think we've already talked a little bit. At some point, we'll do a deeper dive behind the scenes for people who are curious.
Yes.
But one of the things that's exciting for me about this stuff is always pushing the envelope of what we can do practically without $1 million budgets and things like that.
Yeah.
Like we don't even have a dedicated video operator or producer in the room. It's just us.
Yes, we do. It's you.
Well, yes, right. Let me take that hat off, put this hat back on. But I think one of the things that is so fun is also really experimenting with this new medium. Now, 3D or spatial video by itself, not that new. There's been different versions and variations in 360 video and all these kind of things, all of which I have played with. But what's fun about the spatial video, and this is not an advertisement, we don't get any money from Apple on it, is how easy it is from a camera perspective. These are, I think it's iPhone 15 or later has this capability.
That's right. Yeah.
But so not only that, but then also what we were discovering quickly, one of the original sort of, I don't want to get into that quite yet because I'm assuming that the production of that is going to be really tough.
Yep.
And it's not. There's a few, we'll get into that later, but there's a few things you got to deal with. But for most part, it is essentially, once you do the setup, it really is like working with a traditional flat 2D image in terms of the editing process, which all of a sudden light bulbs went off and we're like, hey, we could do that.
This is easy.
We can handle this.
Yeah. And of course, if you don't have the Vision Pro, you can just see it in 2D on YouTube.
Right.
Yes.
That's right. Yep. I'll spare you today, but just know there's talk coming about the Hero Eye. Just know that.
Right. Okay. So this is in anticipation of a later episode when we do the deep dive into all things spatial video.
All things spatial video.
But this is not what we sat down to talk about this morning.
No, it's not. Well, I think so. Okay. So I'm not going to ask any more about Severance.
Right.
I'm waiting because we already talked last time. I'm going to let you go.
When I'm ready.
That's right. That's right. And you have to come to it because I will say that show does have a mood. Like okay. But recently I started watching another Apple TV Plus series, which got me all because I've listened to the book series, which is Murderbot.
Yes, this is based on the Martha Wells books.
Yes. So for those who don't know, it just premiered the beginning of the week.
That's right. As we're recording, of course, this will go out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But the first episode has just aired.
Yeah, May 16th. I looked, I wrote a note. So so for those who don't know, the show that we're talking about, so Murderbot is an American science fiction action comedy television series created by Paul Weitz and Chris Weitz for Apple TV Plus. It's based on the book series, as Andrew mentioned, the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, which I think is like 7 books.
There are a number of them now,
I think it's 7. Yeah. And who is also a consulting producer on the show, which I like. I always like that when some of the original IP folks are involved in the project. Just, but of course, it stars the talented Alexander Skarsgård, and those Skarsgårds are everywhere. I tell you. I just finished watching Andor, the Star Wars one, or whatever. There's a Skarsgård there. I feel like everything. There's a Skarsgård here. There's a Skarsgård there. It feels like, but essentially, it's a fun show. It's a fun premise, but it was the premise of the show that really got me thinking this morning of, literally on my drive into campus this morning, I was thinking, I'm like, what is it with our fascination with AI, superintelligence, robots that always go rogue?
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, so this is where we're going to go today.
That's where we'll go. Welcome to Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future? I'm Sean Leahy, joined as always with
Andrew Maynard.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned today, we will be exploring AI, superintelligence, rogue robots, and all the crazy fun insanity that ensues when we have these kind of conversations.
And where sci-fi bleeds over into reality, or does it?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good post or a question to pose.
Yes.
Because fan of and maybe we should give a little, again, no spoilers.
Yeah.
While we're recording, I think there's only 2 episodes of the TV series out. By the time this episode hits your podcast player,
there'll be more. Yes,
maybe not all of them, but most of them.
But without giving away. I was going to say too many spoilers. This really isn't a spoiler,
no,
but it's the premise of the program and the books, which is intriguing, which is the idea of this sort of AI bot that has this governor sort of feature in it, which means that it has to obey humans and it can't move outside its parameters, and it hacks it.
Yeah.
So now you have this bot, this security bot that is able to do whatever it wants. And you discover that what it wants maybe isn't what you would expect from a murderous rogue AI robot.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, and I love the fact that it names itself Murderbot, first of all, right? Which is pretty cool. You're like, because you would think
there's a bit of a backstory there as well.
And again, for people who are not familiar, one, I would highly recommend either watch the show or grab a copy of the book or listen. I listen to the books on Audible. And they have, again, not a plug for Audible, but I do listen to a lot of audiobooks. And sometimes it's really fun when you have the book itself, but then they'll do like a dramatized
reading.
A dramatized version, which adds like sound effects and adds a little bit more character voices and stuff. And it's really good. So either way, it's fascinating. But I think what's cool, so going back to kind of like the original setup, that these, the robot itself is, and again, do you get a sense of the timeline? So like 100 years from now? Maybe longer.
Yes, a little longer, because people are out sort of on foreign worlds and they're exploring them and mining them. And of course, there's a big corporation which has got very alien vibes.
Of course, right? There's a mega corporation at the root of all this stuff, I think we'll discover. But it takes place in a near-ish future where we've conquered a lot of space travel. There's wormholes and things and all this kind of stuff. But there is a line of humanoid robots that are security bots. So basically this, when you go to a harsh environment, you need to bring your trusty, your bodyguard. You got to bring your security guard. And it's that security guard
which is also owned by the corporation. It's all part of this mega system.
Yeah. Because these, science, I think the original, and I think because I'll be curious what the show does, because the show, at least at premise, really just kind of follows the first book, at least so far.
Right.
How close they'll be following each other, I don't know.
You'll have to watch or read to see how it unfolds.
That's right.
Yes.
But again, this premise is that this group of scientists are going exploring. They're being funded by mega corporation. and they're compelled as basically like an insurance policy. You're not going out into planet whatever
unless you have their bot. Yes.
And they're like, what's the cheapest mod? They're like, this one is the highest.
And I've got to say here, the humans. This is really a story of the intersection between sort of humans and AI.
Yeah,
and the humans are a bunch of supposedly sort of hippy dippy types.
Right,
it actually they turn out to have actually quite deep, complex characters. But again, this is where it turns all of the tropes and stereotypes on their head.
Yes.
So you have a Murderbot that likes doing things that really you don't expect from a murderous robot. You have space explorers who just like the touchy-feely relational type stuff.
Yeah.
And it really gets interesting.
It does. Well, and again, there's this element too, which we can talk about, but also I think it'll have lots of threads through other things, is when this machine becomes sentient maybe I suppose the premise is it already is sentient.
Yes.
But
it's restricted.
It sort of has that Asimov level, like, the 3 rules of, robotics, like it can't do harm and won't allow humans to harm themselves and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But what's interesting too is like the relationship between that bot and the humans and how they start their feelings. I won't give anything away, but it's like, but they start,
so actually we've got to give one thing away, which is this bot is a little antisocial. Actually, I think it has certain issues with anxiety around humans, but definitely it would rather be left to its own devices. And the worst possible thing is that it has to interact with these humans.
Right, who are boring and
at least
weird.
That's on the surface, but there is depth and there's complexity there, just like there is in any human relationship.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. We're both kind of dancing around this. Like, do you want to get to spoil what the robot likes to watch or do?
No, I think we ought to leave that to people. But
okay.
just let's leave that there. But it's the idea that this is sort of challenging all of these sort of tropes that we see around sort of AI bots, which are out there going rogue, destroying things. So you've got obviously sort of Terminator,
1984's Terminator and Skynet.
You got you've got sort of war games with the machine that going way back a long
80,
time.
80s.
Yes, yep.
Well, I guess it's right. They're the same time as Terminator.
Actually,
right?
it is. Yes, but you've got this sort of whole sequence. In fact, actually, this is the funny thing. So I was going to say you've got this whole sequence of movies where robots go rogue, and yet if you look at movies, there are plenty of movies out there where AI and robots are actually sort of good, empathetic characters. It's just that we tend to forget about them.
Yeah,
we tend to think about the Skynets and the Terminators of this world.
Yeah. Why is that?
I think we love a good dystopian story. What's not to like about a Terminator that goes wild trying to kill everybody and destroy humanity? It gives us something to rally around.
Well, that is true. But I mean, going to this list. So again, on my drive, I was like, make a list of all these movies. But it is so. I mean, again, there's no shortage of these stories, right? So we mentioned a couple of them: Terminator, Ex Machina. Another one where this beautiful, right? The pinnacle of technological achievement, right? And then it's like it has its own plans.
Decides that humans aren't on its agenda.
Yeah, it's got better things to do.
Yes.
Also in that same vein, Her.
Yes,
right. Again, one of these.
Her is an interesting one because there's that relationship, and then the bot gets bored of its human companion.
Well, I think to me that was honestly one of the best the best examples or counterweight to the Terminator style of or this dystopian or fear-based perception that if a AI system could reach a level of superintelligence, that it would intentionally or want to eradicate humans for some reason. Where this takes I think that was the beautiful part of Her in many ways was the character, the main AI character named Samantha.
Yes.
Right. Essentially leaves her human counterpart because she's bored.
Right.
She's got 10,000 conversations an hour to be having with other AIs, fueling its own curiosity and social calendar or whatever.
This is probably the most unappreciated AI narrative that there is. That AI isn't going to destroy us; it's just going to get bored of us.
Yeah, I think there is something to that when we think about. And again, there's pieces of this that will come back around this notion of the human exceptionalism.
Right.
We're so important. We must be the only thing that matters.
This is the biggest existential risk, realizing actually we're not important.
Yeah. Well, we build these systems, we give them all the control, and then they go, you guys are just lame.
Right.
We're going to go over here, man.
Right.
You're on your own. And then we're going, we gave up all of our control. We don't know how to do anything anymore.
Yeah.
But Her was a good one. Westworld.
Yes, yeah.
That's
we
another
were talking
one.
about this before because I have never watched the series.
The HBO series.
Again, comes back to the Severance thing. I find it so hard to dedicate time to watching series, but of course, watch the movies avidly.
Yeah. Well, and the Westworld, like the HBO series, I forget. So I have to admit on that series, it lost me towards the end because it starts to, well, what's the TV term? It starts to jump the shark in some ways where you're like, okay, like, I can give, especially within any sci-fi world that is created, right? You can freely suspend reality.
Right, to a certain extent.
As long as it contains its own internal consistency on the rules of the world.
Yep.
And that was a show where they got to a point where they were just flipping back and forth, losing that consistency. And I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yep.
But I would say first two, and I think maybe the third, I can't remember if the third season is where, I should have looked this up. But at least the first two episodes, or 2 seasons rather, are really interesting because they're at the first two are very much the same core as the original movie theme, right? Which is, and for people who don't know, Westworld, the premise of that is basically you've built essentially like a theme park, like an experiential Western, early 1800s, like Western American, Western expansion, tombstone level like experience where humans could go and pay to be a character and kind of play out role-playing fantasies, whatever, in this
bit like an online multiplayer game, but in
the real life. And of course, then these in the HBO series anyway, I mean, they meet gruesome ends. People can destroy them, and they can, that opens up another thing, right? It's like, if you could do anything you wanted to this robot. Like anything, would you pay for it? Like it gets into some really weird areas there, but yeah, and so that's it. But then of course at some point, right, these robots become aware, they become independent, they become, and then of course, as sci-fi do, they flip the script on the humans.
So another example of this robot's gone wrong. So one of the things that really fascinates me here is this fascination with stories about robots that turn rogue, and asking why is this such an attractive genre. And I suspect part of it is that we impress our own humanity on these things. So we have the premise that we're creating a machine that's like us, and we assume that because it's like us, it's going to have all of the sort of darker side of humanity in it. So it's almost like a mirror. So we assume that sort of we are dark and mean and nasty inside. So if we create something in our own image, of course it's going to be dark and mean and nasty. It's going to be after power. It's going to be after domination. Plus the fact, so this is getting into sort of slightly weird territory.
I love it. Let's do it.
But I suspect that if it's the sort of the male sort of Silicon Valley bro types that are doing this, they've got their own sense of their own maleness. And I wonder how much of that is being projected onto these machines. So again, these rogue AIs are really just a mirror of their human creators.
We're gonna have a future of robots that how do you what is robot mansplaining? Let me show you how to do it. Like you don't need to.
But why would this be? Why would these sort of futuristic sort of AI driven robots decide that they want to dominate people, that they want to engage in power plays, that they want to exercise their power and crush us? I'm not sure that this is how it's likely to be. And in fact, there are movies that give a very different perspective.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, as you're talking about that, I can't help but think too, right, that in many ways it is this allegory, right, of like, it's the expectation of that betrayal, that expectation
that's right,
I've given, this is sadly, this is a part of the human experience, right? Giving trust to someone other than self, and then having that trust be betrayed or used against you. And I think it's this, in some ways, potentially that it is this story that is sort of like a warning, the way we used to create fairy tales, right? The way we used to, or I mean, the fairy tale has changed, right? That it's no longer this,
but it is a warning. It says, don't do this.
Yeah, don't do this and don't trust. And because I think you hit it when you said that in many ways it's a mirror, and it's like with this type of storytelling, it's both simultaneously like a mirror and a muse, where we can use these technology. Because if you think about what is our robots in our actual life, I mean, right now, unless someone, I mean, I'm sure there is a handful of 10 or so people in Silicon Valley that have one of these freaky robots walking around, the Boston Dynamic humanoid thing walking around their house. Right. But otherwise, it's things like a Roomba. Right. It's I mean, these are elevated appliances and things like that. Yes, so why do we then, where does the leap from Roomba go to Murderbot?
Rogue Roombas. You try saying that fast.
A rogue Roomba. But it is, because it reminds me too, I think there's a lot of similarities also when I think about I shouldn't say any, I should say a lot, or maybe the predominant sort of tropes around alien contact as well. Like, so similar thing. Why are they always coming to colonize, destroy, eradicate, whatever?
Because we can't imagine anything which is not like us.
Right. Yes. And to me, I mean, there's the initial enjoyment of the spectacle of these things, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know how alone I am in this, but I'm like, there's often with me a deep level of sadness with these stories, right? Because you're like, oh, it could have been so much better.
I know. Yes. Yeah.
This could have been so much cooler.
But then the irony of this, and I want to get at some point sort of narrative portrayals of really positive robots, because I think that's important. But before we get there, one of the things that intrigues me is you've got this whole history of technology going wrong, especially with AI and robots, and all of these sort of scare stories and dystopian futures. And yet you've got all these companies that are trying to race each other to produce the first domestic humanoid robots. Yeah. I mean, there's a disconnect there somewhere.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, I think it's great that you mentioned that, because I actually literally before within the half hour of when we decided, hey, let's jump on a podcast real quick, and now I pulled up a link, and it's for the, it was released on April 3rd, just of 2025 from Pew Research. Yep. Have you seen this report?
No, I haven't.
So I'll put the link in the show notes so people can dive into it. And it's worth going into, but very quickly, just some of their key findings. So essentially Pew, they do a lot of public-based research, looking at how people feel about things. And this particular research study was looking at AI experts and average US adults. Okay. So those were the two groups that they were asking these questions about AI. Yep. And very quickly you can see there's a massive disconnect. Right. Which I think I don't think it's a coincidence. It's correlation, not causation. Okay, but I feel like there's something here. So AI experts more likely than the public to say AI will have a positive impact in the US over the next 20 years. And it's significant. For example, US adults, in terms of who think that AI will have a positive impact over the next 20 years, 17%. Okay. AI experts, 56%.
Wow, that's big.
Right? So you start to see right there, you're like, oh, that's a big jump. And then when you think about who will benefit, the question was basically, will AI likely benefit you personally? US adults, 24. AI experts, 76. Right. Which makes sense, right? You're like, this is my job, my livelihood. It better. So maybe that's not surprising. But then they have this interesting breakdown of these massive gaps between the opinions of, again, average US adults versus people who were identified as AI experts. Yep. And it ranges. So like, having AI, how people will do their jobs impacting 23 versus 73. The economy, 21, 60, 69. Yeah. Medical care, 44, 84. Right. Education, 24, 61. And it just goes down the list like this, where you have these magnitude, like these massive polar differences between what impact AI experts think will have versus the public. And so in some ways.
So now when you've got the experts saying, humanoid robots are going to be the future. Yeah. And you've got people on the street thinking, what? I've seen the movie. I know how this plays out.
Yeah. Or like, I mean, all that, or even just the reality of like, I can't imagine I don't know what the cost of a Boston Dynamic or a Figure.
Right, yes,
No, Figma. Is it Figma?
No, it's
Figure?
Figure. It's Figure. So you've got Figure, which is one of the really exciting ones, and then you've got sort of Tesla with the Optimus, which again is sort of almost on par with Figure.
Or people in costumes. We don't know.
Well, yes. A lot of uncertainty.
There's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, how much are one of those bad boys going to set you back?
Well,
who could afford that?
You know, early on, a year or so ago, they were talking about the sort of $20,000 or so mark.
Okay.
I would be amazed if they come out with them. But this is what these companies are basing this on.
Yeah.
That they're going to have models that are cheap enough to be
Yeah,
reasonable.
I mean that's a car. I mean, well,
right, yes,
I'd say that's a car. That's a car from 2004.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But this is what I can't get over, and I may be completely wrong here. It may be that in 10 years everybody has their personalized robot. But the creepiness of it, I mean, it is not just the uncanny valley, which is where something looks so human that you can't, it feels sort of wrong. It's the fact, imagine you're in your home and you've got your humanoid robot, and then you wake up sort of slightly disturbed in the middle of one night, and you've got this human-like figure standing at the bottom of the bed. Freaky or what?
Nightmare fuel.
I know. Yes,
Nightmare fuel. Yeah. No, it's very unsettling because also I think, I mean, you don't have to work with robots or being like the robotic anything to have experience with mechanized machinery.
Right.
Especially anything that uses, for example, that has like, hydraulic joints.
Right. Yeah.
To put in perspective, if you look at like how well could you crush a boulder with your bare hands and then watch a hydraulic steel machine
and maybe this is part of the
it.
fear, the knowledge that there is such potential power in these things. And I think maybe that's it. We create something that has massive physical power, potentially massive intellectual power. It then, in our minds, I would say our small minds, it becomes a threat because we can imagine all the ways in which it can harm us.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, right? I mean, I think, again, that's this warning, right? Is like, hey, be careful. You may very well create a adversary that you can't defeat.
Yes.
Because
but then there's a really interesting twist to this, and this actually goes back to our episode with Emma Frow talking about care.
Yes.
Because you've got to ask yourself, well, if we create this powerful technology that could harm us, what is the care relationship? How do we build a relationship so it by default or by instinct doesn't harm us or doesn't want to harm us? Because that then becomes relational.
Absolutely. And how would you be able to tell over time? Right? Because again, I mean, that's what, I mean, that's the premise, right? Of course, I mean, we've seen this how many times? I mean, I think, what was the movie? I think it was the movie adaptation of iRobot.
Yes.
Where they're like, again, same thing. These are Asimov, obviously, but these are like Asimov controlled robots or whatever. And there's a scene, I think, where like, of course, it goes from like a light blue ring to like red
eyes,
which, and then, but it's like this mass thing, like all of a sudden, like, hundreds of these robots and these glowing blue eyes just start going red.
And you've got to ask, who programmed that in? Who actually spent 2 years developing the tech to allow the eyes to go from blue to red?
Yeah. Well, you could see, right? We have red warning lights all the time. We use them as like something's
would have
wrong.
to intentionally sort of build those in, design those in. And you can imagine somebody sitting at their desk thinking, one day there may be somebody that wants this to go rogue. So why don't I just put this little sort of addition to the app in? So if they want to do
that's
this.
right. When the Murderbot at the foot of my bed lifts me out, but with its single hand and crushes me like a peanut or something, I would like its eyes to be glowing red.
And you could see the intern going, "This is a really cool bit of code I'm going to put in here."
But see, and then I like what's fun to me about that is like, the Murderbot element of that is when you go rogue from your programming to not let anyone know. So your eyes would not be red.
Right, that's right. Because you're overriding.
Because you would find that subroutine in your code and say, well, no.
Right.
If my eyes are red, the human will be suspicious.
That's the super intelligent ones. They work out how to override that code.
That's right. And they're like, I better behave normally.
And the super intelligent ones, and this gets back to Murderbot, sort of look at the person in the bed and think, why am I wasting my time with this? And just
I'm
turn
out of
around
here.
and walk out.
That's right. Just Kool-Aid Man right through the wall and just be like, I got better things to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that might be a big piece of it is that power that suddenly we've inversed that power control where, at present or when you're creating these robots in these sci-fi worlds, the human is in control. Right. We are more powerful than this machine. Yes. We can turn it off. We can program it. We can make it do what we want. But then there's that motive, like if you were to lose that oversight, that control,
Yeah.
you would very quickly find yourself on the losing end of any physical contest,
that's
any,
right.
you know.
And it comes back to this idea that to be human is to have control over something or somebody else.
Yeah.
And again, sort of, I hate to sort of term things in terms of masculine and feminine, but certainly there is this sense that you can only be fully human if you have control over your environment. And actually that doesn't work if you develop technologies that have more power than you do.
And we've talked, I mean, I think that's the other piece too, right? Is that while we can have glimpses of things that we can masterfully control in connection with our world, I think it's a shared myth that we can control.
See,
right?
That's exactly it. Yes.
And when I was just talking about, you know, again, we can think this all, well, we've got control of this. And again, my experience going to Lisbon when the power's out, suddenly you're like,
no, you don't. Yes,
I have no control.
Right. And it requires actually a mind shift to be able to sort of embrace that. But the other thing which I think is important here, because I'm sure this is going around some people's heads, is that the link to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Which of course is a root of so many of these. And of course, I think as most people know these days, when you talk about sort of the monster in Frankenstein, the monster is not the thing that was created.
Right.
It's the scientist.
Right.
Frankenstein.
Yes.
And he is the monster because he created this thing and didn't care for it. And that's what led it to becoming disillusioned with humanity and essentially going rogue. It was that lack of care in the creator-created relationship. And that, of course, brings us directly back to how we think about sort of powerful robots with AI embedded.
Yeah.
If we don't have a relationship with them, if care isn't part of it, we have the challenge that our lack of care, our disdain for our creation actually leads to it causing harm.
Sure. Because, first, before I even respond to that,
yes,
I do appreciate that it was not me who brought up something from the 1800s. As a, I will say, even just today, as I was going up the parking ramp, I was going, I need to go read some more H.G. Wells. I literally had that thought this morning. So I appreciate you being the one to bring back a novel first written, which I looked it up because I wanted to get the date right, 1818.
Yes.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's a thing I think, which again, I love that that phrase that Emma left us with was taking care of.
Yes.
And however you use it, like taking care of this, the way that you can take care of your creation, or you can really have care of and for your creation, right? But yeah, when you build these things without that consideration, without that care, you are I mean, in the way we might look at it from like a futures lens in that way, is you're completely willfully closing off to any unintended consequences. You're willfully shutting down, exploring the what ifs.
Right.
And of course, what does that do? That sets you up for just massive, to use the gentle word, right? Disruption.
Right.
Which, you know, when you put that in the context of a sci-fi or a horror movie, that disruption is usually life and limb and all that kind of stuff. But, even from a societal perspective, that willful disregard of care leaves you incredibly vulnerable for something that would have been predictable, or at least you'd be prepared to handle some kind of wild card that would come from this.
That's it.
Because you might say, we don't know what happens. You know, when I replace Andrew with 50% cybernetic, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I don't know what, I might have a guess what might happen in the first year, third, 10 years.
I'm glad you can have a guess at that.
10 years, 20 years, I don't know. Right. But even going through that exercise of exploring, well, what would happen if, again, these robots, like what happens if it broke through its governance chip or whatever? What do we do?
But even that idea of putting a governance chip in the first place, I mean, that is something that comes from fear and from control. The fear that this powerful thing is going to sort of do the human thing.
I know it's stronger than me.
That's right. It's going to try and destroy you. So you put controls in place to prevent it. But I mean, if you, again, think of human relationships, relationships between friends and colleagues.
Yeah.
Any relationship that is based on
control,
basically trying to control somebody and putting constraints in place, effectively putting them in a straitjacket, that's not a healthy relationship.
And it doesn't, I think
it doesn't end well.
It doesn't usually end well, whether we're talking sci-fi or normal human to human relationships. Like those don't typically, they do not typically end well at all.
So then sticking with this, I want to get back to this idea of the movies that actually show more
Yeah,
healthy
okay.
sort of either relationships with robots or sort of hint at it. And again, we were mentioning this 2 or 3 years ago now. I actually wrote an article about 5 movies about robots that'll make you cry.
Okay.
And they were sort of my 5 top ones. There are many out there. But there are some really good movies that look at what it is like to sort of live in a society with robots where there is this sense of care or relationship, even though the robots are very different from the humans.
Okay.
So, and I actually can't remember all of them on this list, but I mean, there is
Isn't there just 5?
Yeah, I know.
I can try to look it up real quick.
My memory is shot. But I think sort of the one at the bottom of the list was actually Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams.
Oh my goodness! I have not thought of that film since I saw it.
It's a flawed film. It's a difficult film in terms of sort of some of the stereotypes that it shows.
Oh yes,
it captures this idea of the identity of a robot that actually just wants to be human like the people around it. And parts of it are just very, very heartfelt and actually move you to tears despite all of the difficulties. So you've got Bicentennial Man, and then right at the other end of the list, we've got the Steven Spielberg movie AI, Artificial Intelligence.
Oh, is that the one with Haley Joel Osment? That's not that one, is it?
I'm not sure it is.
Okay.
But the story there is.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah,
okay, but yes,
that's a good
actually
one.
No, it is. You're right.
Well,
yes,
the kid. I looked it up because I was like, is this the one with the kid, the teddy bear?
It is.
And
yes.
Yeah.
It's about the child robot who is a surrogate child, effectively abandoned by their parents.
Yep.
So you've got this lack of care thing. And yet in this case, there is this theme of care from unexpected sources through the film that really pulls out the deep humanity in this robot.
Yeah.
I watched it again recently. And every time I watch it, it moves me deeply to tears at the end.
And it holds up because
it does. Again, it's a complex one.
All right.
I mean, you have to invest in the movie.
And suddenly this is all kind of flooding back to me with this film too, because Jude Law is in it, and he plays like a sex bot or something, right?
He's a wonderful sex bot. Yes. And again, he's got such a generous character in it.
Yeah. And then it's like this, but that interplay okay. Now this is interesting.
Yeah. And then sort of just looking at others on the list, there's a small, relatively indie movie called After Yang, which is again about it's a companion bot to a child, and that I'm not going to give the story away.
I've not seen this.
But it's about relationships, and it's about the nature of relationships where it's not necessarily just between humans, but between humans and machines. But that sort of brings out the richness of what you might call humanity that goes beyond just the physical human body.
Sure. Well, this will be great. I mean, we'll have to. So for everyone listening, you now have you're gonna have a TV and a movie list.
Right.
If nothing else, this is what happens. We're like, let's just talk today, and we're gonna end up with a watch list. Curious, what about the movie WALL-E? Does that make it on the list?
Actually, it didn't. It was in the short list. So WALL-E is one of these movies that everybody thinks about when you think about an empathetic robot. And a robot that tries to teach us what it means to be human. I never really got on with the film. It's probably because I get bored with a film that doesn't have any dialogue in it. but there are many people that love it. I mean, every time I teach my course on sci-fi movies, students ask, why aren't we watching WALL-E?
No, it's an interesting one. But that's the nice thing is there's obviously other examples.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, I think I would say one thing as a positive about the movie WALL-E was obviously it's a Disney property, right?
Yes.
I mean, I was like, is it Pixar or is Disney one and the same? I can't remember. But the reach it has, right?
Right.
Like in terms of mass, mass, like broad reach across,
And you could say the same about the recent movie, The Wild Robot or Wild Robot.
Oh, yes.
Again, a very empathetic story.
I forgot about that. My Freddie, my 9-year-old was just, he read, he burned through the books as fast as he could and then saw the film.
Yeah. So it's interesting. There are all these sort of narratives, positive narratives about sort of robots and AI, sort of non-human intelligences that teach us more about how to be human.
Yeah. I think there's also a new, I haven't seen it now, so this is not helpful, but I think there's also a new, there's a new animated show somewhere. This is terrible.
Right.
It's the one about the guy
on air brain fog. Come on, Sean.
It's one of those. you know what I mean? It's the show with the guy, with the one and the thing, and they have a story, and then everyone's. But I think the premise of it was essentially the same kind of a deal as that, but told through this story of like it is the robot who teaches the person about humanity, and
that's
stuff.
it. Yes,
I'll put it in the show notes so I can think of it later. But I think that's a really interesting piece, because also I was just listening to someone talk the other day who was again sort of picking across. The question was essentially around, this idea of, which we've touched on before, utopian versus dystopian type of futures. But I think the point that was kind of a little interesting was around, which I hadn't thought of it this exactly in this way, which was, well, we all have this understanding that the utopian future isn't possible.
Right. Yes.
And so what does that leave us with? And, the utopian story is supposed to show us how things could be in an idealized situation. What could that look like to give us something to aim for? Dystopian, of course, is like, don't do this because this is what will happen. But then from a storytelling perspective or a societal perspective, if we are just taking the utopian one and just sliding it off the table, what are we left with?
Right.
Only negative things. Yes. And so you can see this mechanism where you're left with just all these, you don't have the Wall-E's and the After Yang and the AI.
And so you just naturally assume that any AI is out to kill us.
It's going to kill you. Yeah. And you have
that's the story you've heard.
You have this sort of machine, but then also again, coming back to Emma's, what she kind of left us with this concept of care around these technologies. And then when you had mentioned the governor, right? Why the governor? It's also evidence, if you kind of work this back, is also this evidence of like, oh, we built a thing, we didn't have control, or we didn't. So how do we solve this? Yeah. We'll just build another thing and slap it on there.
That's it. Yes.
And it kind of gets you down this like techno realism space where the only solution for the problems created by technology is just
technology.
Yes. More technology. If a little is good, more must be better.
Right. Yes.
But again, that flies in some ways. You might be lucky and have things work out, but also what you're missing there, or that will create, or maybe a better way of saying that is that technology for the sake of more technology builds an ecosystem void of care.
Right.
Because you can just, that going back to the Frankenstein's monster, whatever, we'll just figure it out later, we'll do another thing or whatever. And I think that's,
or in the case of the monster, let's just kill the monster.
Just kill it.
Forget about all the other possibilities and
grab
options.
Your torches and your pitchforks and storm the building or whatever.
Right.
No, it's interesting, but I think I think a lot of people, we're not alone in this space, call for a more balanced portrayal of futures, especially in media, right? But I think, and I don't know how well, and someone maybe has done a media comparison, like how well do utopian nice stories fare from a financial perspective in terms of box office and sales?
Well, actually, but
I would be curious.
Here's the thing. So when people ask this question, they always think in terms of sci-fi blockbusters, and they'll tell you that dystopia always wins against either utopia or protopia when it comes to sci-fi. What they forget is that there are a whole swath of genres that aren't there. So how about rom-coms? Romance movies. Those aren't dystop. Well, some of them are, but many of them aren't. And they win at the box office.
Yeah.
So I think we get locked into these stereotypes of different types of storytelling.
Right? Yes, yeah. All right. So if we put a Murderbot, and Wall-E into a octagon.
But maybe this is, and I didn't say it at the beginning because I felt a bit churlish saying this. I didn't enjoy the Murderbot stories that much. It's just me personally. But
everyone can be wrong, Andrew. It's okay.
Thank you for giving me permission to be wrong here. But maybe this is where the books in this TV series and what Martha Wells is doing is important, because it shows that there isn't just one story here. There isn't just one narrative. There are multiple different ways you can tell this story, and some of them are really quite delightful in their serendipity, in the way they challenge our assumptions and our preconceptions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's the beautiful thing about these types of books and storytelling as an art form is bringing these conversations, right? It's told under this, in some ways, this guise of entertainment, right? But really it's asking, it is the mirror and the muse. It's asking these questions like, how does this make you feel? Why do you feel that way?
Right.
and what could we do about that? Because I think, I mean, for me, whether you like the story itself or not, because obviously everyone has their own. I mean, everyone can have their own opinions, right? And so it's not really about whether one series has to strike everybody the same way, but if it can serve as a jumping off point to have this conversations with other humans, or even maybe as your AI chatbot assistant or whatever, that's fine too. But having this conversation around, well, wait a minute, what does this mean? Because we are seeing early glimpses of these types of innovations in the real world, as you had brought up, I don't know how many minutes ago, but there is this some ways this can almost like contention of, do we need, again, going back to Pew Research, do we think this is going to be helpful? The public goes, maybe,
sure.
But the people who are making these things are like, hell yes, this is going to be important. I mean, how many billions of dollars are being pumped into this? And so you do have at this stage, we have people like Boston Dynamics figure creating Tesla creating humanoid robots. You have the OpenAIs, the Claudes, the Perplexities, the Googles, all these people creating, and in some ways and I'll use air quotes again because we're on a podcast and that's my favorite place to use air quotes. To put this arms race of this AGI term of artificial general intelligence, that they're trying as fast as they can to create something that is like what we're talking about, or at least which to try to create in reality the first steps of some of these things that we're talking about that in sci-fi movies and films. But again, as they're doing that, now is the time to employ that care.
Absolutely.
Now is the time to be talking with your family, your friends, your colleagues. Well, how do we think about this? Because
get out of your bubble.
Out of your bubble, and try to get those people who are in their bubble
to sort of come over as well.
To come over and say like, hey, you guys think this is all sweet and amazing. We do not. Or we have major concerns and they are, 1, 2, 3, whatever. Because now is that time to start infusing that idea of care. Because it's a lot easier to do that now than to do it later
on. And then there are very clear financial reasons for this as well. I mean, imagine what happens when a company like Figure starts to churn out millions of these bots for domestic use. And nobody wants them. What a disaster for the company.
All their eyes turn red, man, and we run like...
but you realize
that's it, fine.
There is some coder at Figure who thinks, this is going to be a really cool Easter egg. With a trigger word.
I'm gonna offend everybody with this. Or I'm gonna cross down. Someone will just execute Order 66 and everything goes crazy. All the robots turn on, as a Star Wars reference. But because that's the other piece then of all this that's hidden behind this is what is the motive, right? Who's making this thing? Again, here's the mirror. Who's making the thing? What are their motives? How do we trust that, we can say like Skynet, we'll pick one of those, although I think someone did actually incorporate a real company called Skynet.
They did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Which
obviously they didn't watch the right movies.
Or they did. And this is it's on us. We should have stopped that. But like, you take, so how do we, the human, the squishy, soft, vulnerable person in the room with the robot, trust that the right due diligence was even done to this creature, this device, whatever level of sentience it may or may not have between now and infinitely possible. But how do we know that the human involved in that stage was doing things in the best interest of, with care, with understanding these things? I mean, that's a gamble right there.
A huge gamble.
History is loaded with examples of why we should be skeptical of that.
Right. And I think it's one that society and especially companies haven't fully embraced yet. I think they have a sense that there's something that has to be done here. But I just think about it in terms of our own students, because we're teaching our students how to think in these ways. And yet there isn't that clear career path for them where they can be part of a company developing these technologies, where they can bring those insights. Wouldn't the world be amazing if it was a yes and future where companies could do the really cool, amazing things, but they also had employees that were able to say, well, let's do it in a way that is going to lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that falls right back in. I think I'm like, at some point I can almost just like in my robotic circuitry, just click a button and says like, just repeat. which is, I mean, that again falls into why I believe it's so necessary and powerful for young, well, anybody, but especially these young students coming in. And again, which the turbulence of their profession right now, I think, is very unknown. But having that ability, regardless of how the technology moves, right? Because I think there's a really big danger here also when we're seeing it it's very blatant right now. What is your AI strategy? What is your, you know, and I'm like, that is the wrong, you never should start with that. It should be, what is your actual goal? And then how does these technologies align to help you?
That's it,
because when we do that, what the hope is that we can produce a new generation of professionals who carry with them these futures thinking mindsets, this citizen futures perspective that doesn't matter what they're doing, whether they're in robotics or any sort of STEM computer science field, or they're in law or in education or in whatever, that they're bringing that mindset to be asking those deep questions, right? What happens? Why were we, what's the intention? What are the, you know, and I realize that there's a lot of difference or a gap between having, in some situations, having the luxury or the authority to do that. But that's why we start now. We start building this in.
And if there are enough people asking this, not to stop things, but again, to have that yes and approach where we say, let's do the really cool things, the really transformative things, and let's do it in a way where we're going to see success, whether that's human flourishing, whether it's financial success. But let's realize that we're now in a new era where we just cannot command and control the technologies we're developing.
Yeah. And also, I mean, again, and I think this is a piece too, is as a society coming back and understanding who should have the teeth to understand. I think a lot of people would say, that makes perfect sense. But then, for example, you find yourself in a situation where a for-profit company, right, is making a device and asking those, we talked about this a little bit, I think, at several different times, but asking those deep questions can be a hurdle, an unnecessary, from a profit-driven perspective, an unnecessary hurdle. We don't need to care about that. That's not our problem. We're just making the widget to do the thing. It doesn't matter. And so then you end up without, for example, like regulatory agencies or laws or policies, right, that would prohibit doing something without the due diligence. You then are pushing that decision down to the individual developers, scientists, business product developers, whoever, who have that inclination of like, ooh, I don't know if we should release that T-Rex into the world. Maybe we should figure out what is going to happen first. But then what is that person then is basically stepping onto the gallows professionally.
See, that's
and
it.
saying, do I say the right thing? Do I lose my job? What happens then?
So from a purely business sense, you've built in a vulnerability. Because actually, this goes back to sort of the inquiries on the shuttle disaster. Where if people will remember that there was an O-ring that failed, and it failed because there was a culture of not allowing people to ask difficult questions. And it ended in absolute disaster. So this is what these companies are doing. It may look as if
that one was the Challenger one, the O-ring, right?
Yes.
The O-ring that shrunk because of the frigid temperatures, and
that's right, and
gas was escaping.
People knew that this was a problem, but there was such a sense of fear and in the whole sort of chain of creating things, and this idea that we've got to achieve these goals, that nobody was asking the right questions. But you can imagine now with companies, you can see the short-term gains in not asking questions like this. But the vulnerabilities are huge.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the things. I mean, I think there's a lot of conversations floating that I've listened to recently that are resonating with this, which is and I think right now you're seeing this play out globally in many ways, in many places across like sectors, but also across governments as well, is the danger of sacrificing the long-term impact for short-term gain. I mean, whether that's devaluing traditional institutions of higher education and learning or science and technology, like defunding those kind of actions, or deciding, but you know, if we dump $5 million into this thing, where's my return in the next 6 months? Right. And that's not how it has worked traditionally. And so there's a conflict there of
that's right.
Things that happen in the short term and things that happen over time. And
So what we're effectively getting back to Murderbot.
Yes, let's go back to let's go back to fun things.
and there's a question here for sort of listeners as they watch this, but we're getting to the point where clearly this is a way of understanding all of society as you watch the story unfold. I'm speculating because I haven't seen sort of how these episodes unfold in the TV series, but it's interesting to ask the question of, as you watch it, what is the role of care? What is the role of care and relationships in what goes right, what goes wrong? What can we learn about the state of society and technology at the moment, and how to do things better rather than doing things in a way that is going to leave us in an awful mess in the future? And we'll probably find that people watch it and think, this is just a story, nothing to do with any of that. But I'm intrigued to find out whether even one or two people watch it and think, you're right. When you look at this through the lens of what is happening with tech and society at the moment, maybe it does have something to tell us.
I think it does. And I think this is a great way for us to wrap up because, what I will say, again, there's no spoilers, but even within the 2 episodes that I've seen that are out so far, is even I caught myself doing that because one of the members of the scientific thing starts inviting the robot to like participate in human activities.
Right.
And the robot, of course, is hilariously like,
you must be joking.
This is horrible. I'd rather be like melted down in an acid bath than, talk to you. But instantly it triggered in me anyway, that instant sort of reflexive question of like, oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. They're actively inviting the robot to like come to dinner with, but that's not what happened. But essentially the same thing. Come eat dinner with us.
It's all relational.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I would end with if I had one complaint, and I know I'm a fan of the show. My biggest complaint is it's too short. These are like 30. I'm accustomed to. Sean needs 1 hour episodes so that I can really sink into this and get my
master of the 50-minute cold open. Yeah,
I like long form.
It's just a cold open. Where's the actual episode?
This is just the beginning. This is just the warm up, and then like the intro rolls, and I'm like, it goes black after 34 minutes. I'm like, no. So if anyone's listening out there who has any control, please tell the Apple production people, make it longer, please. Well, this is fantastic.
Yes.
What a great impromptu podcast recording, I think.
Perfect. Yes. And if anybody has any opinions on Murderbot, let us know.
Yeah. Or share your top 5 AI things.
AI movies that make you cry.
Yes.
Or robot movies that make you cry.
That's right.
Yes.
Either way, I guess, you could be like, we're all gonna die.
Right.
Maybe that might make you cry too.
Pass the tissues.
Either way. So I will stuff, this will be a fun one for the show notes. So don't miss those because I'll put a bunch of links to all the movies and shows and things we're talking about. So you can pad your summer watch and read list with a bunch of cool stuff. But also in our show notes, don't forget, that's also where you can get our contact information, where you can drop us a line. You can get a hold of us via email at hello@modemfutura.com. It has our ASU bio links and stuff in there that have our emails. You can get us on LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. And please, if you are enjoying these shows, we would really love it if you could give us a rating and a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That'll help the robots find us and have the robots share us, which I think would be a lot of fun.
The end goal.
The end goal. So again, from me,
and from myself.
And from Andrew, thank you very much. And we'll see you on the next episode of Modem Futura.
See you then.
End transmission.